Okay, so happy New Year's Eve. This is the last episode of the year. And just ate lunch. So I talked in the last episode about men and rape culture and about retroactively the ways in which my interpersonal experiences needed to be re-evaluated and recontextualized and re-understood for myself, with the assumption that the quantum below microsecond level of presence of my mind and my attention was valid and significant in my decision making. And as I realized that, as I mentioned, I started noticing different areas in which I had gone along with things I had actually wish I hadn't. And I also discussed the ways in which women are conditioned to do that kind of thing, and to participate in or be complicit in different forms of violence from a very young age. It's something that I have struggled with as a person and as a tomboy throughout my life, this frustration with women's weakness, or misogyny at the end of the day towards my own gender, or the gender I was assigned at birth. The trans erasure is real when you're non-binary, because it's like, it doesn't count. It just counts in a different way that I'm still learning and exploring. But this misogyny I've always been very careful of, because I recognized it from a young age as being sort of born from my frustration with the lack of seeming responsibility women take over situations like this. And it's a lot of why women stay in domestic abuse situations, feeling like they deserve it, or that it's their fault, or that it's inescapable. And this intentional curation of victimhood in women, and then also by women, is one of the most horrific things that I have ever seen. And when I talk about taking ownership of your decision making and your experiences, and understanding in a victim empowerment way the nuances, that's one thing I almost never see with women taking responsibility for the ways in which they help to perpetuate harm. Because of this inborn assumption of victimhood, there's no possibility they could ever be perpetrators of violence. And it's an aspect of rape culture that does harm in the same way as I was previously describing men's privilege doing harm to them. And I don't know how to address it, and I never have, because kicking somebody while they're down does not help them get back up. So I've never known quite how to address it without being misogynistic or blaming women for the impact that rape culture has on them. But in the same way privilege deforms men and white men, the oppression of women in this way And the infantilization of them makes it very difficult for them, or more difficult for them, to take responsibility and ownership for their own lives and their own actions. And that is a genuine issue that we are struggling with. When you grow up conditioned to be dependent, finding and struggling for and fighting for independence is harder. I was raised without a father, and the assumption that my lack of father figure would impact my life in an astronomically negative way was prevalent throughout my early childhood. It never really came from my mom, but it was around. And the older I got, the more frustrated I got with that assumption, because it seemed to me that the main thing that was impacting me when it came to my lack of a father was how important my lack of a father seemed to be to everyone else but me. I barely missed him. I had plenty of positive male role models in my life in the form of my older cousins and my uncles and teachers that I admired, and other forms of positive male influence. Authors, for example, those people are still real, right? People in movies are still real people. Actors are real people. Directors are real people doing real things, being truly influential. There's plenty of positive male role models in the world. I don't need a direct fatherly one to get the benefit of it. And I get that there's plenty of stuff that I'll never actually understand about what it's like to grow up with a dad, but I'm kind of okay with that. I'm more frustrated with the fact that my lack of father is being blamed for a variety of things, including my attitude issues. Trust me, that's more about something else. But my mom was kind of scared, or I got the sense that there was a fear of my being taken advantage of by men, or that that is something that would happen and that she wanted to protect me from. It's not an unreasonable fear for a single mom to have. And when you're trying to raise a daughter, it's pretty scary to think about her going out in the world and potentially being hurt by the rape culture that we all know we're living in. The father figure is meant to be protective from that culture, I believe. Although, by doing so, he perpetuates it. And because that overarching miasmic fear existed in my young adulthood, and I was the kind of kid who wanted to make my mom happy and to prove to her that there was nothing to be afraid of, that guys were not that scary. And because of my early exposure to the open web, as I have mentioned several times at the tender age of 11, I, in a somewhat Elliot Page hard candy sort of way, sought out men in a challenge kind of way to see if they were really that scary, or if they could be that scary. And that's how I found that guy that I was telling you about, who, like, in a positive way told me he could beat me in the military if we got married. Like, that's where I was finding these people. And I would find people and I would meet up with them in an edgy sort of way. I was confident that I could judge people based on their energy and the way they interacted with me, and that I could trust my own judgment about that, and that no matter what, I would get what I wanted from the situation without them having to have any particular power over my personal narrative. And despite how somewhat messed up that is, that was the way that I chose to handle this concern surrounding my independence, and to give myself reassurance that I could be an independent, autonomous creature. So when I talk about that older guy that I dated and slept with, I don't know that many people in his position would have been able to resist the concentrated effort of an incredibly intelligent, persistent young woman who very much constantly acted far older than her age. Does that excuse it? No. You're still an adult when I am a child, and you should have fucking controlled yourself. And I would expect adults in that situation to be more of an adult. But as I've mentioned before, he was hiding from the responsibility of adulthood. He was trying to return to high school in an emotional and a spiritual way. And in the time that we were with one another, we were more or less meeting each other on equal ground, obviously not completely. But this is what I'm trying to illuminate about rape culture, and I hope it's coming clear. I know talking about these topics can be so triggering and so sensitive that it's hard to hear the point. But none of this would have happened under conditions where women were actually equal, or actually treated as equals, who weren't conditioned to be victims, to be subservient, to be dependent, where that wasn't the assumption. Child marriages still exist in many different parts of the world. This is a historic, generational practice that we are only seeing ourselves growing out of now. I'm so stoked that I grew up without knowing my father. I did later meet him and learn about him and come to understand why my family protected me from even the knowledge of his presence. But that was when I was 18 and an adult, and I asked for that knowledge and I was given it, and then I sought it out even further by meeting him. And you know what the most important, most impactful part of meeting my father was? Getting to know his new wife, admiring her, learning her trade as a network infrastructure telecommunication company. That was so much more useful than actually meeting my father. That part wasn't really that exciting. He was just about the same level of shitty that I kind of expected. And did his new wife end up dumping him? Yeah, she did. He was not a great person, and he continued to not be a great person. His main skill was finding women who were incredibly powerful, incredibly strong, and somewhat of a sucker for a sob story and a cute face. The women in my life have impacted my life so much more than the men in my life have, and yet somehow it's still always about them. My behavior is considered fatherless daddy issue behavior because it has to be about dads. It's definitely not the fact that I wanted to reassure my mom that there's nothing in life that I would ever be in danger from. It's definitely not me trying to reassure her that the world outside isn't really that scary, and even the scary men can be handled by me. And it's not like I didn't demonstrate that. No, it's still somehow about the guys. Somehow. This is rape culture. And this is the way in which women are conditioned to assume that that's the way that it needs to be. That men are, due to their physical strength and theoretical logical acumen, the obvious dominant party of the genders. You can understand my frustration here. And it's one reason I've always struggled with trying to have relationships with women, like romantic relationships with women. I've never felt like it was a fair power dynamic. I have always felt more independent than most women I know. I get pigeonholed into the daddy role, and I don't like the whole, calling chopsticks a spork and a spoon and a fork when they're chopsticks. It's not that. And I recognize that my exposure to women loving women relationships or people was, up until more recently, fairly limited and young. I'm 30 years old. There's plenty more, 32. There's plenty more potential for exploring romantic, sexual, loving relationships with women in a way that does feel equal and that doesn't feel like an awkward power dynamic, or that I'm getting put into a certain role purely because of my independence and masculine tendencies. I don't like calling it that because it's not inherently masculine. But that's rape culture. Like, I cannot express enough that that is rape culture. And the fact that everything I got from that relationship with the older guy, and the way that it helped me and my life, the way that that friendship grounded me in my life, though the many benefits I got out of that are for him overshadowed, and in a larger sense, when the story gets told, overshadowed in a way that turns me into a victim and him into a bad guy, is a natural conclusion of living in a rape culture. Because how else can we view that? It's unthinkable that she just used the parts that were good for her and moved on with her life, because that would be way too autonomous for a mere woman to do, right? Like, victim empowerment is so hard because victimhood is assumed to be a powerless position. It's beneficial for victimhood to continue to be a powerless position for those in power, those who are perpetuating re-victimization. So in all my life, I will be up to 90 with frustration with women not taking their own power back, not operationalizing their own power, not accepting being victimized without necessarily internalizing victimhood as a subservient, dependent situation. Because no matter what, they are literally the victims there. She wasn't asking for it. She was conditioned to be that dependent. She is fighting through so much unseen conditioning and trauma to become independent. That's why I support women's wrongs. That's why I love crazy women. Crazy women. I'm like, you're not crazy. You're reacting in a very normal way to very abnormal, shitty situations. Almost every time. There's no way. I'm sorry. And the amount of times that women apologize drives me crazy, even though I also do it, right? I had a friend the other day who was like, oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to, I'm sorry. And I'm like, oh, please stop. I love you. There's no need to be sorry. World of pure imagination. Gotta love Willy Wonka. Yeah, gosh, 20 minutes in, I don't know what else to say here. We still have a wage gap. Like, we still have gross inequity between genders, and we're only talking in gender dichotomies here, not even considering non binary perspectives or the spectrum that we really should be thinking about gender upon. And trans women get it, in 10 different worse ways. And then cis women and their lack of solidarity with trans women, I'm like, you could actually grow and become so much more independent if you like figured out how to love trans women as though they are fellow sisters. But you're too lazy to do that. Like, that's what I see with cis women, and it drives me nuts. People with privilege have so much extra space, and they fill it up with trash. They fill it with mindless bullshit. All of these like little jokes about all the things that you bought on Temu as like, oh haha, I'm so bad, but I couldn't fucking help it. I'm like, yeah, you fucking could. You're ruining the environment for the sake of temporary instant emotional gratification to fill a giant hole inside of you that you're actively avoiding doing anything useful about. That's on you, girlfriend. That is a you problem. Cis women disgust me in that sense. And it is a cis woman problem. Any trans women who are struggling with Temu addictions, I'm giving you a pass. I think you have it hard enough. Go ahead and fill that void, girlfriend. And I shouldn't have to point out that men disgust me at the same level, especially heteronormative cis men. Disgust me in much the same way in their lack of empathy, lack of solidarity, lack of genuinely supporting women. You could be doing so much more. So much more. You have so much extra room in your head and in your life. But I guess they spend way too much time trying to figure out how to protect women in a way that improves their sense of their own masculinity rather than actually how can we help women. And again, it goes back to that fragile masculinity, that instability, lack of security in masculinity, which I cannot stress enough, definitely has something to do with your relationship with your own ass. I don't know why I have decided that the end of the year is the time to let everybody know what annoys me about them. But I have been working through a lot lately. And one of the problems for women and people who are socialized as women is this conditioned behavior of considering the well-being, both emotional and physical well-being of the people around them before considering their own well-being. That is, it goes in direct opposition to what I have consistently been talking about when it comes to spheres of influence and doing your internal shadow work before reaching out to the people around you to do interpersonal work. Women are conditioned to do the opposite thing, to see themselves only through the eyes of the people around them, to think that it is evil or bad or self-centered, selfish, self-indulgent, in some way completely unacceptable to first look after and look at themselves with their own eyes and make judgments and assessments that way. The way that men are conditioned to do on their own as individuals, as independent, autonomous people who have the privilege of being considered independent, autonomous people by default. Women are not given that assumption. And you can blame evolutionary groupings of genders around childcare and warfare, but that only goes so far. You don't want to be considered animals unless it's convenient to blame your animal nature for your behavior. We are products of our environment. We're products of our genetics. We're products of our social groups. We are responding as animals to these stimuli. But we do have the ability to notice, to direct our attention, to decide what receives our attention. One thing I've noticed with women when they begin the journey of genuinely looking at themselves through their own eyes and working to have an understanding of self and a more secure self-concept that starts out from the premise of looking at themselves and being the first judger of themselves rather than looking to the judgment of others to determine understanding of self. One thing I've noticed in all women, including me, going through that process has been this just complete lack of understanding where to start and an overwhelming sense of dispiritedness. To realize that your entire perception of self has been constructed through the lens of how others view you. Not even how others actually view you, but how you perceive others viewing you. That is so exhausting to be like, oh no, now we have to do something. Like, you mean I have to view myself and decide how I view myself based on what? I can't use other people's relational idea of that. I have to use my own. How do I do that? You mean I have to come up with opinions that I can justify to myself about how people should be based on what I see around me and in a way that doesn't make me feel like mean or cruel or judgy? That goes against everything women are conditioned to do. We're conditioned to be caregivers and nurturers, caretakers, mediators, problem solvers, peacemakers, keeping things nice. But we all know the harm that Mother Dearest does when she wants to enforce niceness over reality. Or preserve concepts of self over the well-being of her children. We know how much harm that does. All of us do. And once you start really digging into what your opinions are and what you think about stuff and giving yourself permission to say, no, I don't care about your opinion of me, or I'm not really interested in hearing about that, or that seems like a waste of my time. Starting to value your time in that sense is hugely empowering and hugely powerful. My frustration over the ways that the disproportionate ways in which the men in my life are weighted by outside judges about my life is understandably frustrating when it's my life. My narrative, my perception of the story, what I'm taking from this and using it for, in theory, should be the more important aspect. If I was a man, you would assume that would be the important aspect of my experiences. Going through warfare, for example, or extreme conditions, say I am a man and I get into a fist fight at a bar, nobody is overly concerned about whether my opponent is going to impact my life emotionally and psychologically for the rest of my life because he was a big scary guy that I fought. No one's thinking that. That was a bad example. But it's a really hard topic to discuss, and I'm probably filling it with all sorts of biased beliefs and behaviors that are only mine. But women do a lot of harm that they don't take responsibility for. By allowing their dependencies to continue. It's another reason I have empathy for men. I try to build solidarity relationships across divides I don't understand wherever I can, because obviously I feel like that might improve the world. And I like guys. In a lot of ways, I'm more comfortable around men because there isn't a baseline assumption that I'm going to share myself with them. And I hate that baseline assumption. I love sharing, don't get me wrong. And I love the strong, resilient, interdependent communities that women grow together when they are sharing with intention with each other, and creating those network relationships is a beautiful thing. But more often than not, sharing as an assumption, as a default, is toxic. You aren't entitled to every last emotion that I experience or every last thought that I have just because we're both girls. And it's weird that you would assume that. And in the same way, I'm not entitled to yours. I'm not entitled to any part of you. And you always assume I am. Of course I never want to interact with women at that point. And it's just a certain amount of internalized rape culture that often we can't escape from. I've participated in it and perpetuated it myself. I'm trying not to. You don't owe anybody anything. I don't either. Whatever I've shared with you, whatever I've given you, has been with knowing intention and a free hand. And I'm more often than not convinced that other women feel the same way. And maybe that's just misogyny. Could be. But the world as I have seen it pitting myself against the scariest men and realizing how unscary they are. The scariest circumstances, the scariest thing that anybody could conceive of telling me might happen to me as a lone woman in the world. I went and sought that out as a teenager because I didn't want it to stop me from living my life. And was that a little bit psycho of me? Yeah, but did it give me a great deal of confidence moving forward? Yeah, it did. Once I had conquered the scariest thing, what else was out there to worry about? Turns out I had to worry about getting back in touch with my own emotions and being emotionally present with myself after kind of training myself to be emotionally closed off. But we all have to come full circle on something. And I get so frustrated that my friends, like my women friends, have the sort of bad boundaries in this sense that make it impossible for us to be as close as I would like us to be. I can't be close with women in the same intimate, emotional way I can with men, which is just wild to me. It shouldn't be that way. It's not always that way. But the fact that I can't trust them to like actually know that they are sharing what they want to share with me or doing what they want to do with me makes it really hard to engage with them past certain levels. It's rape culture, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist just to get what I want out of that relationship. I'm not going to keep perpetuating rape culture for my own sake. That would be awful. And if it's offensive to my lady friends out there listening to this, thinking that's some bullshit, I hope you're pissed, man. Get pissed. Show me where your boundaries are. Show me you have them. Show me you have your own opinions, that you are an independent, autonomous thinker, that you make your own decisions, that you share what you want to share, and you mean it. Why am I lacking confidence in that? And hopefully you can tell when this doesn't apply to you. But I do feel I just spent quite a long time talking about men and their insecurities, so I figured it wouldn't be fair if we didn't talk about women and their insecurities. Again, I share both. And I'm not immune to this. I have had bad boundaries too. I have overshared when I would rather have not. And of course, at the end of the day, I do believe that shared joy is never a loss. So I can't even regret it at the end of the day, because the love and the friendship that is a part of the sharing is not a net loss, it's a net gain. But as far as taking ownership and control and power over your own autonomy, it can't continue. Maybe I'm just telling myself that. Maybe I'm projecting and being a hypocrite, and I need to make it about you so that I can understand the way that it's about me. I was conditioned to see myself through the perspective of others first, so that would not be surprising if that was the case. I did not understand my own sexuality or myself as a sexual being first. I understood the way others would sexualize me first. From mainstream media, from raunchy older men. And it wasn't just sexualization. that shaped my perceptions of myself before I was allowed, before I was given space to create organic self-perceptions. I share this issue. I experience internalized misogyny. And I'm trying really hard not to perpetuate it. Yes, all women. We all experience this. And it's not like dependency is an inherently bad thing. Being interdependent is an incredibly good thing. It's one reason the level of polarization and the divisiveness between genders is so damaging, especially for heteronormative couples or couples in heterosexual relationships. Is that even the way to put it these days? When you're gay together, but you're not the same gender? That divisiveness just increases a illusion of separateness that doesn't need to be there. And the fun differences between genders, like the fun ways that we are different and unique, the things that we should be able to play with and explore in positive ways, is overshadowed by the way this divisiveness and the unequal power dynamic in legislation and culture and history continues to perpetuate harm. I keep thinking about talking about the iron-jawed angels the other day and the ways in which women were given the right to vote, aka the ways in which violent extremist women dragged the right to vote out of the throats of legislators at the time through their own tenacious and often violently demonstrative efforts. I keep thinking about those women and the way that I talked about them the other day, and the way that this infantilization of women perpetuates pedophilia and child sexual abuse. The jailbaitedness of it all. Being like, oh, women had to be gifted the right to vote. They were given the right to vote from Sky Daddy or Daddy Patriarchy or whatever we're calling it. The history of women's oppression is incredibly long. We are fighting, those of us fighting for independence and equality are fighting against thousands of years of oppression. But our silence is the worst part. I promise when you start talking shit, you'll feel better. And protect your actual time and your headspace. You have so much room in your head. Just especially when you kick out everything that doesn't need or deserve to be there. It's your mind and your life. You only get one, and it's short. You don't deserve to be abused. You don't deserve to feel dependent on your partner or anyone. You deserve independence. As a default, as an assumption. You deserve care and love and affection. And you deserve your own headspace back. That's yours. It starts to feel like an intrusive thought at the end of the day. Just constantly thinking about everybody around except for yourself is exhausting. And what do you do when you drop the ball? Everything stops. Everything is happening because of you. That feels like responsibility. That feels like your job. I had a friend once who said that their grandma or mom or aunt or somebody always referred to women as being the one with 8 arms or octopus arms, or maybe as many arms as she needs to have. And I was like, that's kind of cute because she meant it in a positive way, but I was like, that's really fucking disturbing. Everybody has 2 arms for a reason. They should carry their own shit. No, it's not your job. If they can't care for themselves, that's a them problem. Obviously, I don't mean your actual children. That one might be your job. But all the adult babies around you who seem ultra super dependent on you to like continue existing or functioning in the world without giant breakdowns deserve to have the giant breakdown. Let them be babies and notice the way that they are babies and then grow up. You are not helping them. You are perpetuating their infantilization by continuing to caretake them. Especially at your expense. And it's different if you're doing it on purpose. It's different if you are accurately weighing the energy expenditure and then deciding to do it anyway. But doing it like it's a default, doing it like it's your job, like it's an assumption, like it's the bare minimum that you have to do just to exist in the world, and then on top of that, also a job, also other things. No, it ain't. No, it's not. That's not equality. It's not humanity. That's oppression. It's not your job to caretake everyone in the room, especially before yourself. You deserve to caretake yourself first. And anyone else as a genuine voluntary effort outside your kids who you are responsible for. And the dads are responsible for those kids too, by the way. It's not just women that are responsible for the kids. It takes 2 to make kids. Or a lab. Sometimes it takes more than 2, but it definitely takes a minimum of 2. And you're really not helping anybody by doing that. By taking on the world, to caretake the world, to prove that what? You're valid, you're real, you're allowed to exist. Fuck that. That's awful. You're allowed to exist. You already do exist. So if somebody showed up and just revoked your existence permission, what would you do, right? Like, are you gonna end your life? No, I hope not. Why the assumption, why this default underlying assumption that you owe the world caretaking or prettiness or a certain type of femininity in order to exist in it? You know why. And it's time we put a stop to it. Together. Women are some of the best at collectivistic efforts. I shouldn't have to tell you. Oh, but, you know, I have never seen anything more powerful than women in full control of themselves banding together to enact change in some way. I know I talked about mothers against drunk driving the other day, but there are plenty and plenty and plenty of examples, and I get so frustrated in this world that we don't acknowledge them as like independent representations of strength or justice, that it's still framed within this context of, the distaff have accomplished something again. Isn't that novel? No, it's not. They're literally running the world. They are literally accomplishing everything. This weird idea that singular male leadership is the thing that ultimately moves mountains is insane and very obviously illogical. All of this invisible labor, invisible effort, the assumption of caregiving the world as a means of demonstrating one's worth in existing in the world is the thing that's literally keeping the world together. Yeah, wow, I know. And I've never met a guy that didn't like know that or acknowledge it in some way. Really, I've never met a guy who didn't like acknowledge the power of women in some way. So the fact that we all definitely know this also really frustrates me, because I'm like, well, then what's our excuse? Why are we allowing this to continue? What's happening here with this rape culture and the conditioning of dependency and forced dependency, infantilization? And I really don't want to go back to the whole, is there a secret ring of pedos somehow ruling the world? Because, yeah, sort of, but also the shell game of power has already swapped that around to the point where me talking about it actually isn't going to be effective or useful at the moment. And in order to actually target that particular issue, I'm gonna have to come up with new directions from which to hit it. Ran out of my ability to be accurate in that. Or maybe not accurate, but effective. There's only so many times you can complain about the thing that Epstein whistle blew over because it's very clearly real and definitely affecting us. But I would have to assume that after Epstein, there was a quick shuffle of different things around the globe: money, people, positioning, power, infrastructure, the movement of bodies that have been bought and sold, different people in different possessions of different pieces of information for the entire schema, whatever. There have been some shuffling around on the board to make Epstein's revelations less impactful if they were to be operationalized by those with the power to potentially do something about it. It is my sense that that shuffling has occurred. What did I call it? The mixing up of the shell game or whatever. You know where shell game comes from, right? Just like conch shells being used on piers, 3 in a row. Hey, mister, put a penny under this, and if you can guess which one it is after shuffling, I'll give you 2 pennies. Shell game. Like, I'm not kidding when I talk about the East Indian Trading Company and the British Royal Navy and the Royal Society as means of influence for culture and the distribution of people and infrastructure around the world. Like, these things are hugely impactful today. And women's bodies have historically been commodified, objectified, turned into possessions to be had or purchased. And so have then their children. Women's liberation is our liberation. I would just like to meet more women stridently impassioned about that. The amount of women who feel like the word feminist is a bad word is just awful. It hurts me on such a deep level. The amount of women who are soft-spoken about their support of other women, or who are soft-spoken in their quest for women's liberation, is fucking painful. It's hard for me to not feel misogyny, and it's something I work on all the time, to not be pissed off and victim blamey about the whole situation, because it's frustrating. But it's still not their fault. We can do something about it together, and we should. But it's not their fault that they've been conditioned from very early developmental ages to view themselves this way and other women this way. Once you realize it, yeah, it is your responsibility to do something about, but you have to give yourself some grace too. You have to give yourself time and space. How do you do anything towards liberation if you don't have time and space to do it? How are you supposed to care for yourself when you've been conditioned to care for others first? And think of yourself as last, as not as deserving of your own attention as those around you. That's hugely difficult to work through, and it is a lifetime's work. There are things that will kick you back many steps and it's painful. Much like the sun. Maybe that's a bad metaphor too. It's painful in a different way than the sun. It's very bright in here right now. Solidarity relationships are best built outwards from the identities that you already possess and across divides that are most easily bridged. That's why as a white woman, it is the easiest to understand and empathize with white men, although that is not ideal. It kind of sucks. It hurts because that's the most privileged group, right? White wealthy men. The ease in which empathy moves from me to them is sometimes dangerous and scary, and it has to be contextualized within a larger group of others in order for me to make it useful or to do something about it. My identity as a woman and my ability to empathize as a woman opened doors for empathy in racial justice and racial inequality, reading the words of women of color and being moved in empathy by their work and their beauty opened doors for me to better understand men of color. And whatever ways work for you are obviously the ones that you should use. But solidarity bridges are only built by your active engagement in building bridges. You know how they built bridges? Proper ones in deeper rivers? It was really intense back in the day. You had to sink a bunch of rocks and create a dam, essentially. I'm probably not explaining this super well, but you create a well, a circle of rock, and then you drain it. You fill it in with mud and all this stuff to make it so that once you start draining it from the inside, no more water leaks in. But you sit there with people in boats and with buckets. This is back in the day, again, medieval 1600s-ish, getting out of the medieval era, and you're taking buckets and removing all the water from the inside of this circle that you made of rocks, and then that's where you put the giant pillar that's going to hold up the bridge. But you have to sink the rocks in a circle, fill it in with mud somehow. There's a lot of diving involved, there's a lot of nautical stuff involved. People will die during this process, almost certainly. Building bridges is fucking hard in both a literal and a metaphorical way. So, sorry if I'm doing a bad job. I'm not the best at being a cis woman anymore. And I'm not 100% sure what I am now, in the sense that I don't have a full handle on the way that my bias resurfaces, because everybody has bias built into us from our rape culture that we live inside of, and the patriarchy, Although income inequality is much more my concern at the moment. I feel like we could handle the rest fairly easily as human beings if we all were not suffering from housing insecurity. Just a thought. Just one of those passing thoughts I'm thinking about. Okay, I'm gonna go. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next year.